The chamber erupts as Jasmine Crockett exposes the most guarded secret of the Trump dynasty, a divorce agreement that turns marriage into business. Melania Trump's silence traded for $500 million in power beyond the ballot box. Was this Jasmine Crockett's ultimate takedown of Melania Trump? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The chamber of Congress blazed with white lights, every camera locked on the witness table. Millions watched live, holding their breath as silence pressed like a weight. Jasmine Crockett entered, steady and unflinching, her red folder clutched like a weapon. She was not here to ask, but to reveal. The air crackled as she placed the folder on the table, eyes burning through the marble hall. Then Melania Trump appeared. Perfect makeup, flawless dress, but her eyes told another story. Tight, restless, cornered. She sat, lips pressed thin, hiding nerves behind a mask of calm. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice cutting like steel. Today America will hear the truth. The chamber froze. The nation gasped. Silence thundered. The chamber had frozen in silence after Jasmine's opening words, the kind of silence that felt heavier than sound. Every eye was locked on her red folder, and every camera waited for her next move. She drew in a steady breath, placed both hands on the table, and with deliberate precision, she flipped it open. The room seemed to contract as the first page glared under the white lights. This, Jasmine announced, her voice sharp enough to slice through marble, is the contract signed in 2021 after Donald Trump's defeat in the presidential election. Her words carried like a gunshot, and a ripple of gas spread through the chamber. She raised the document so the cameras could catch the bold header, then lowered her eyes to read. According to this contract, Jasmine said firmly, her tone unyielding, Melania Trump is guaranteed $500 million. In addition, she is promised ownership of the Palm Beach estate. In exchange, she must agree to one condition written in clear, unambiguous language: do not disclose family or financial secrets. Each phrase hit the chamber like thunder, echoing off the stone walls, hammering into the ears of millions glued to their screens. Jasmine's voice did not tremble. She did not soften the words. She wanted every syllable to burn. The cameras panned swiftly toward Melania. Her face was flawless, her dress immaculate, but her eyes betrayed the storm raging behind her mask. Her lips pressed together until they formed a single hard line. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice dripping with icy disdain. This is fabricated, a complete invention, a falsehood designed to humiliate me. She raised her chin defiantly, daring Jasmine to push further. But Jasmine was ready. Without missing a beat, she reached for another folder beneath the red one and snapped it open. If this is fiction, she said, her eyes locked on Melania, then explained these. She slid the documents across the polished wood for the committee to see. These are bank statements, Jasmine continued, her tone now sharp with fire. From accounts in the Cayman Islands. They confirm the creation of a trust fund valued at $500 million, the exact amount stated in this contract. Funds allocated, assets transferred, a paper trail that cannot be erased. The screens above the chamber lit up with blown-up images of the statements, every line highlighted, every dollar circled. Melania's face flickered briefly, a shadow passing across her composure, but she forced her gaze downward, refusing to look at the screens. The explosion came not from Jasmine, but from the room itself. Reporters leapt to their feet, cameras flashed, voices rang out. "Is this true?" one shouted. "When was it signed?" another demanded. The entire chamber was alive with noise, a storm breaking after the unbearable calm. Jasmine raised her hand, signaling for silence, then turned back toward Melania, her voice steady but lethal. "So tell us, Mrs. Trump," she pressed, every word cutting. "The air, is this the price of silence? $500 million in a mansion in Palm Beach, was that what your voice was worth?" The roar of voices dropped into a stunned hush. The question hung in the air like a blade. Melania did not answer. She lowered her eyes to the table, her carefully constructed mask beginning to crack. The flawless image faltered as the weight of Jasmine's words bore down. The silence stretched heavier, longer, until the only movement was the flicker of camera shutters capturing every second of her stillness. The nation sat riveted. The marble chamber, the blinding lights, the stack of papers on the desk. It all seemed to collapse into one frozen tableau. Jasmine upright, resolute, unflinching. and Melania bowed silent, staring at the polished wood before her. The tension was unbearable, cinematic in its brutality. Millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens, feeling the air tighten. Knowing this was no longer politics, it was revelation. And in that silence, history shifted. The silence after Jasmine's strike lingered like smoke in the air, but then Melania straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. Her voice cut through the tension, smooth yet trembling at its edges. "This is nothing more than a family trust," she declared, her accent sharp, her gaze fixed on the committee. "It was created to secure Barron's future, to protect my son. That is all." The words echoed, crafted to sound maternal and noble, a shield against the storm now crashing around her. Some nodded, others frowned, but no one looked away. Jasmine did not blink. She reached calmly for another sheet of paper, eyes never leaving Melania's face. Her voice was a razor as she read aloud, email from a former accountant dated July 2021. Quote, "This fund has nothing to do with Barron. It is compensation, a payment to ensure silence." End quote. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The cameras zoomed closer, capturing every flicker of Melania's expression as her composure cracked under the weight of those words. The room buzzed like a hive. Lawmakers whispered furiously to one another, heads bent in disbelief. On television screens across the nation, bold red letters blazed, $500,000 for silence. News outlets pushed the headline live, their anchors breathless. On social media, hashtags exploded within seconds, millions typing furiously, arguing, mocking, demanding answers. America wasn't just watching, it was erupting in real time. But Melania said nothing. She gripped the table, her knuckles white, her lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. The strategy was clear: endure, absorb, deflect, say nothing that could dig the hole deeper. Jasmine leaned forward, her final words like a dagger sliding home. "We have not reached the end of the truth. But you know, Mrs. Trump, you know I still have more." The sentence dropped like a hammer, and the chamber held its breath again. The chamber held its breath as Jasmine opened another folder and laid it flat under the lights. Her voice carried with a deliberate calm. "This is the sworn testimony of Daniel Mercer, a former accountant at the Trump Organization. Under oath, he stated clearly that the agreement in question was not spontaneous. It was an exit strategy prepared in advance." She pressed a button, and a recording filled the hall. A man's voice rang out. "They are no longer husband and wife. They are only partners on paper." The words cracked through the silence like a whip. Melania shot to her feet, her chair scraping back against the floor. Her hands trembled with fury as she shouted, "This is fake news. This is slander, lies spoken to destroy me." Her face flushed, her composure shattered. Cameras caught every flicker of rage. The chamber erupted, voices clashing in disbelief, but Jasmine did not move. Her gaze locked on Melania with unshaken steel. Then Jasmine raised another document, a stack of travel records from 2021. Her voice cut the noise. "These logs show Mrs. Trump's movements for the entire year. For months, she did not live with Donald Trump. The dates match exactly the period when this agreement was drafted and signed. Screens lit up with timelines and stamped entries, leaving no space for doubt. The impact was electric. Senators rose from their seats demanding independent verification. "We need these records authenticated at once," one called out. "This evidence cannot be ignored," another pressed. The room shook with tension, every word adding to the storm. Melania stood frozen, the fury drained from her face, replaced by a pale stillness. Slowly, with no words left to shield her, she sank back into her chair. Her face was white as marble, her lips pressed shut, and for the first time that day, she had nothing left to say. The chamber fell into an eerie stillness after the eruption, the kind of silence that rang louder than any noise. Only the steady tapping of the chairman's pen against the desk broke the air, a faint rhythm that carried across the hall. Melania sat rigid, her eyes darting once to the cameras, then back to the committee. When she finally spoke, her voice was cool, measured, almost rehearsed. "This is nothing more than a financial arrangement after the presidency. It is a standard agreement, and it has nothing to do with the nature of our marriage." Her tone was defensive, her words wrapped in the language of business, as though a contract could erase the storm swirling in the chamber. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice cutting with surgical precision. If this was only financial Mrs. Trump, then why include a clause forbidding disclosure of family and political secrets? Her question landed like a hammer, sharp and impossible to deflect. The committee shifted in their seats, and the camera zoomed in to capture the split screen, Jasmine's steady eyes against Melania's pale face. The tension was unbearable, a duel fought in silence as much as in words. Melania's lips parted slightly, but no answer came. Outside the chamber, the story detonated across the airwaves. CNN flashed its banner in red: exit strategy or fake marriage. The headline burned across televisions nationwide. Anchors scrambled to fill the silence, repeating Jasmine's exact words, looping the footage of Melania's reaction. On social media, Americans exploded with outrage and disbelief. Were we lied to for 4 years? One comment screamed. Did we vote for a family or a business deal? Another demanded. Across the country, living rooms buzzed with the same uneasy question: had the nation been fooled by a political marriage built on paper instead of love? The shouting outside dimmed to a low roar as Jasmine reached for something hidden at the bottom of her red folder. She paused long enough to let the room breathe, then slid a sealed sleeve across the table and broke the tape with a steady hand. The fluorescent lights caught the edge of a slim packet stamped in bold letters, and the cameras pressed closer to the witness table. "This is an addendum," she said, voice steady, eyes fixed on the dais. "It is a part of the contract that has never been made public," and the room leaned forward as if pulled by a wire. She lifted the first page and read line by line so that no one would miss a word. "Addendum, supplemental terms executed after the primary agreement," Jasmine said, clear and measured for the record. "Party 2 shall accept the transfer of assets as set forth above." She continued, never breaking eye contact with the committee. She turned the page and let the silence tighten like a cord around the chamber. "Party 2 shall agree not to cooperate with investigative agencies regarding the finances and taxes of Donald Trump," and the last sentence hung in the white light. Shock tore through the room in a visible wave that rattled papers and nerves. Staff members stood half out of their chairs, pens suspended in midair, as if movement might break the spell. A senator pointed at the screen and shouted, "This is obstruction of justice," and his voice cracked on the final word. Another senator rose and echoed the cry, the words bouncing off the stone walls until the chair pounded for order. Still, the line from the addendum kept ringing sharp and merciless, as if the building itself wanted to speak it again. Melania stood, then faltered and gripped the edge of the table because the room seemed to tilt under her feet. Her mouth opened, but no sound came, and the cameras recorded the silence in close detail. Color drained from her face until the careful makeup looked like a mask set on stone. She looked at the page, looked at the cameras, looked down again, and could not form an answer to anything. Finally, she sat and bowed her head. The fight gone from her shoulders, her hands folded tightly to stop their trembling. Jasmine did not raise her voice because she did not need to claim the air already hers. "This clause is not about a marriage," she said, each word slow and plain, so there would be no confusion. "This clause is about blocking the path of the law," and she let the committee see the signature lines and the witness stamp. She closed the packet with careful hands and set it in the center of the table, where everyone could see it waiting. "The truth about this marriage is not just private business. It is a threat to justice and democracy," she said, and the cold, heavy silence answered. The last line of the addendum still vibrated in the air when the chamber steadied. Melania did not reach for the microphone. She kept her eyes down, fingers clasped tight, breathing through a mask of poise. The chairman tapped his pen and asked whether she wished to respond, and she gave no answer. Silence spread again, cool and heavy, settling on shoulders like armor that suddenly weighed too much. Jasmine did not celebrate. She simply closed the red folder and straightened the edges of each exhibit. Her face was calm, her voice, even her focus, fixed on the record and the oath. When the chair thanked her, she nodded once and said, "The documents are before you." No smile crossed her face. The victory was in the clarity, not in the applause. She let evidence speak while the room absorbed the weight of what it had seen. Then the contrast sharpened like a cut through glass. Jasmine lifted her chin, shoulders squared, standing, as if the floor itself had chosen her. Light washed over her, and the camera settled on a profile that read, as steady and clean. She did not gloat, she did not taunt, she honored the process that brought them here. In that posture, she looked not like a politician, but like a witness for the law. Across the table, Melania rose at last, but the movement lacked power and drifted like smoke. She gathered her bag with hands and the cameras caught the tremor she tried to hide. Her shoulders slumped, the line of her back bent by a weight no stylist could smooth. Without a word, she turned toward the door and began the long walk past the crowded rows. Applause did not follow, only the soft click of heels and the faint hush of whispered questions. Jasmine remained at the table. As the gavel tapped once, her posture tall, her expression composed. She gathered the exhibits with careful hands, stacked them cleanly, and looked straight ahead as if into a clear horizon. There was no triumph in her face, only the steadiness of someone who had kept faith with the facts. Light caught the edge of the red folder. As she closed it, the image felt like a seal in wax. In that stillness, she seemed less a victor than a standard, a quiet figure holding the line for justice. Behind her, the doors whispered closed after Melania, and the echo faded down the long corridor. Reporters lowered their voices, the audience held its breath, and the broadcast cut to the still frame of the empty aisle. On one side stood a woman who showed evidence and spoke plainly. On the other walked a woman who chose silence. The choice between them was stark, and the meaning reached every household that watched, from bright city apartments to quiet farm kitchens. Two women, one truth, one silence, bought with money, stood in the same white light, and all of America was the witness. The gavel strike faded, but outside the chamber, the story had already detonated. Within minutes, every major outlet in America carried the same banner across their screens and front pages: the exit strategy, Trump marriage exposed. Anchors spoke in urgent tones, replaying Jasmine's final words, dissecting Melania's silence, looping the image of the red folder that seemed to glow under the lights. Newspapers printed extra editions. Talk radio lit up with callers, gasping, furious, incredulous. The phrase exit strategy became more than a headline. It was a wound cut open in the national psyche. The questions multiplied in living rooms, diners, and workplaces. How many other politicians are doing the same thing? Callers asked live on air. How many marriages are really just power contracts? On social media, hashtags trended in waves, millions of comments flooding every feed. Some were stunned, others cynical, many enraged. The notion that the first family could have been built on paperwork rather than love shook Americans to their core. It wasn't just a scandal, it was a mirror reflecting back the fear that politics had devoured the intimacy of family. Inside this storm, Jasmine remained calm but relentless. At her first press conference after the hearing, she said plainly, "Truth cannot be buried under money. It always finds its way back to the surface." The statement ran on every evening broadcast, clipped into sound bites that played over footage of protesters marching with signs reading, "No more fake families and democracy is not for sale." She pressed further. "We need political relationships built on transparency. We cannot allow marriage or money to corrupt the foundation of democracy." The words struck a nerve because they were both simple and brutal, cutting through excuses with a clarity no one could dismiss. Women's groups roared into the conversation. Some leaders asked, was Melania a victim trapped in a contract, or was she complicit in protecting corruption? Their voices clashed on talk shows and op-eds. Panels of women argued late into the night, one side painting her as exploited, the other as an enabler. That question, victim or accomplice, was debated in every living room, in every classroom, in every office coffee break. It turned Melania into a symbol, not just a person, a stand-in for the blurred line between suffering under power and wielding it. Meanwhile, America's legal community dove headfirst into televised debates. Former prosecutors and constitutional lawyers filled primetime slots arguing fiercely about whether such a contract could ever be valid under U.S. law. One shouted across the table, "This is obstruction, plain and simple." Another countered, "No, it's just a private agreement, ugly but not illegal." The clash of legal minds played out like courtroom drama, on screen, drawing millions of viewers who never before cared about tax law or family contracts. For days, the debate dominated primetime: legality versus morality, contract versus crime. And yet, underneath the legal jargon and political spin, ordinary people felt their trust collapsing. For decades, the image of the president's family had been wrapped in notions of unity, faith, and honor. Now that image lay in shards on the floor. "We believed in them," one woman told a reporter through tears. "We thought they were a family. Turns out we were believing in an act." Polls showed confidence in political families plummeting overnight, with questions of authenticity gnawing at the fabric of national identity. The betrayal felt personal, not abstract. Through it all, Jasmine became more than a congresswoman. She became the face of defiance against the machinery of silence. Crowds began chanting her name at rallies. Editorials called her the woman who dared to say what no one else would. Social media lit up with her speeches clipped into viral videos, hashtags praising her courage, spreading like wildfire. She was no longer just a politician. She was a symbol of truth in a country suffocating under secrets. The deeper lesson began to crystallize, carried in every commentary and every debate. Truth can be painful, but silence bought with money only feeds injustice. Jasmine repeated it in interview after interview. Silence does not heal. Silence sells the wound to the highest bidder. The line became a rallying cry. College students painted it on banners. Activists chanted it on the steps of courthouses. For millions, the phrase captured both the scandal and the antidote. And so the narrative solidified. Two women had stood in the same chamber. One chose evidence, the other chose silence. One spoke for justice, the other for secrecy. America had witnessed the clash and taken its lesson. Jasmine Crockett was hailed as the woman who broke the silence, who lifted the curtain on power, who forced the country to look in the mirror. She became not just a participant in history, but a symbol of it, the woman who dared to say aloud what everyone else whispered in the dark. The chamber emptied, but the echo of the confrontation refused to die. Within hours, the weight of what had been revealed began pulling the highest levels of government into motion. In Washington, committees met behind closed doors. Phones buzzed, documents circulated, and staffers whispered to each other with a mixture of awe and dread. By dawn, the Speaker of the House had announced what many already expected: Congress would launch a formal investigation into what was now called in bold type the exit strategy. The mandate was clear: they would examine the alleged financial agreement, trace the offshore accounts, and review the hidden dealings of the Trump organization. It was no longer just about a marriage. It was about the possibility of financial deception that reached into the heart of American politics. The hearings were barely concluded when subpoenas began flying. Former accountants, advisors, and attorneys who had touched even a single page of the Trump organization's finances received notice. In hallways thick with tension, lawmakers told reporters, "We cannot ignore this. If a private contract was used to obstruct the law, it is not just scandal, it is a threat to justice." Senators who had once defended Trump began to hedge, choosing words carefully, their loyalties suddenly blurred. For the first time in years, it seemed the shield of untouchability around the Trump empire had cracked. The Capitol pulsed with the realization that one woman armed with documents and determination had forced Congress to act. Across America, the reaction was volcanic. Families at dinner tables argued. Radio hosts shouted into microphones, their callers furious or triumphant. "Are we living in a democracy or a dynasty?" demanded one voice. "Has money and marriage become the currency of power?" asked another. In churches, in bars, and barber shops, the debate raged. Supporters of Trump dismissed the revelations as an attack on family privacy, while others saw it as undeniable proof that politics had become a marketplace where loyalty, silence, and image were bought and sold. The phrase "family as cover" appeared on banners at protests where crowds gathered outside courthouses and city halls. America was divided but united in one truth: the conversation could no longer be ignored. What electrified this moment was not only the scandal itself, but the speed with which it spread. On YouTube, clips of Jasmine's fiery question, "Is this the price of silence?" racked up 10 million views in 24 hours. Comment sections flooded with outrage, admiration, and disbelief. One user wrote, "This is bigger than politics. This is about truth itself." Another countered, "All marriages have secrets, but this is not just secrets. This is a contract for power." By the end of the week, the video had passed 50 million views, appearing on trending lists in countries far beyond the United States. Memes, remixes, and short edits turned Jasmine into an icon, her red folder becoming a symbol in itself. Television networks devoted round-the-clock coverage. CNN's banners screamed in red exit strategy or fake marriage. Fox News countered with political circus or criminal evidence. MSNBC played the recordings on loop intercut with expert analysis from former federal prosecutors. Morning talk shows invited panels of psychologists to discuss what it meant for the nation's psyche to realize that the first family may have been a performance scripted by lawyers and accountants. Night after night, Americans tuned in not for entertainment, but because they sensed the very fabric of democracy trembling under the weight of the revelations. But amid the noise, Jasmine's voice cut through with piercing clarity. In an exclusive interview, she declared marriage cannot be turned into a political contract. Families are not props for power. And silence bought with money is not loyalty, it is corruption. Her words traveled like sparks, igniting debates in schools, churches, and unions. She went further. One person standing for the truth can shake a system built on lies. That is what democracy means. These sentences, clipped and shared, became rallying cries on TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Posters with her words appeared at rallies across the nation, handwritten in black markers shouted in chants that rolled down the avenues of Washington and New York. At the same time, the legal world churned with ferocious energy. Constitutional scholars wrote essays overnight. Law journals devoted special issues. Was the addendum enforceable? Could a private contract that restricted cooperation with investigators be anything but obstruction? On Sunday talk shows, heated exchanges unfolded. One attorney argued, "This is a textbook example of obstruction of justice disguised as family law." Another shouted back, "Private contracts, however distasteful, are not crimes. If this is illegal, then where does privacy end?" The clash of perspectives only fed the fire, making the case not only a scandal of politics, but also a crucible for the nation's understanding of law, marriage, and democracy itself. The debate spilled over into everyday life. Ordinary Americans began questioning everything they thought they knew about politics and family. In diners across the Midwest, patrons asked aloud whether love had any place in the halls of power. In crowded subways, commuters read headlines and muttered, "If the first family was fake, what else is fake?" The scandal ripped through the illusions of stability, leaving citizens to wonder whether democracy had been corrupted, not just by money, but by the intimate bonds of family turned into tools of control. For many, the betrayal cut deeper than policy failures. It struck at the myth of authenticity that bound leader to people. And yet, within the chaos, a lesson began to take root. Commentators distilled it into three truths that Americans repeated to each other like mantras. The first, marriage cannot be transformed into a political contract. Love is not currency, and family is not theater. The second, silence cannot hide truth forever. Even when buried under millions of dollars, truth claws its way back to daylight. The third, one voice can shake a system. Against billion-dollar structures of power, one woman with documents had cracked the wall. These lessons became the deeper story, whispered from living rooms to lecture halls, from small towns to great cities. Jasmine herself framed it best in her closing words to the press. "The truth about this marriage is not just private, it is public because it touches democracy itself. If money can buy silence in the home of a president, what else can money buy in our nation?" The quote, plastered across magazines, became hashtags and was etched into posters carried by students in protests. The moral clarity she projected resonated because it was both simple and profound. As weeks turned to months, the scandal did not fade. It grew. Documentaries were announced. Publishers scrambled for book deals. Late-night hosts crafted monologues. But above all, YouTube remained the battlefield where the story lived. Clips of Jasmine confronting Melania's silence and the words "exit strategy" lit up screens again and again. Each upload spawned millions of views, millions of comments, millions of arguments. For the digital generation, the scandal was not just history, it was live, interactive, a story everyone could touch. Through the firestorm, one image endured. It was the footage captured at the very end of the hearing. Jasmine Crockett rising from her chair, the red folder clutched at her side, and walking slowly toward the exit. Cameras followed as she stepped into a corridor blazing with white light, dozens of microphones thrust forward, flashes bursting like lightning. Her expression was steady, calm, resolute. She did not wave. She did not smile. She simply walked as if carrying the weight of history on her shoulders. That image burned itself into the memory of America Jasmine walking through the storm, a symbol of justice, truth, and courage. In classrooms, teachers replayed that clip to students learning about democracy. In editorials, journalists described it as the moment America confronted its illusions. In households, parents pointed to the screen and told their children, this is what it looks like to stand up. The story may have begun as scandal, but it ended as symbol, the reminder that courage is contagious, that truth is heavier than lies, and that even one person armed with nothing but evidence and resolve can make a system tremble. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.